Once upon a time, Street Fighter 2 was a thing that happened. And when you have a thing that happened, you port that thing over to as many video game and computer formats as was humanly possible. Some were fair efforts, such as the 16-bit iterations on the Super Nintendo and Sega Mega Drive. Others were not so fair efforts, such as the early computer ports like the MS-DOS release. And then you have something like this. Street Fighter 2 for the Sega Master System, courtesy of Tectoy. Released in 1997 exclusively for the Brazilian market, since apparently the Master System was still the hot system there, this downgraded version of the Capcom Fighting Classic gave you 8 playable characters. Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Guile, Blanca, Balrog, Sagat, and M. Bison. Now let's just get this out of the way. Street Fighter 2 does not fare well on the Sega Master System. It's an admirable effort, but you can only push the hardware so far, and really the gameplay is where the whole thing falls apart. Each character has precisely 2 special moves, and as such, your moveset is severely limited in this regard. Now this in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, however trying to execute special moves is a near impossible endeavor. You could try rolling slowly or rolling quickly. You could try charging for a second or a minute, nothing will come of it. Unless it's a move like Chun-Li's lightning kick where you just mash the button repeatedly to do the move, special moves seem to execute when they feel like it and not necessarily when you'd want them to do, and even then it's an extremely rare occurrence. But even if you go through this version having never tossed a Hadouken, it really doesn't matter because all you really need to do is run in close to your opponent and hit them with your basic punches and kicks, and they'll do the job just as well. And at that point, it's about as exciting as it sounds, and after a while, it starts to feel a bit tedious. Not to mention lopsided, since poor response prevents you from using your special moves effectively, while the computer AI has no such inhibitions. There's a part of me that wants to cut a bit of slack because it's a Master System game and the hardware isn't quite up there. But then again, I played Kart Fighter on NES and it's an otherwise better game than this, and that was a pirate original. Graphically speaking, well, they tried. The character sprites look about as good as you're going to get, and they're fairly decent looking in a bubble, even if they appear a bit small. Even the mugshots are of half-decent quality despite the lesser color palette of the Master System. There are only 8 staged backdrops and most of them have been simplified with reduced background elements. So some of the larger set pieces like the Boat and Ken stage or the Huts and Blanca stage are removed from this version. Animation is also not quite fantastic, though to be fair, it does run a bit smoother than the Game Boy port. Take that for what it's worth. One nice surprise with this version is the announcer voiceovers, which might not be the same voiceovers from the arcade Street Fighter 2s, but it does sound really super clear, like really clear.
Round 1. Fight!
It doesn't quite have the rough sounding quality of the Mega Drive Street Fighter games, and that's a bit of a nice surprise. None of the other fighters have their voice bites, however, which is unsurprising, and you're just left with the stock sounding punches, kicks, hits, and other sound effect sounds that sound like Master System sound effects. As far as the musical bits go, they tried. And I think that's as far as I'll go. Overall, Street Fighter 2 on the Sega Master System isn't very good. Not much of a revelation, I suppose, and not really much of a surprise considering its extremely limited release. I suppose comparing it to other more official versions on higher end consoles is probably not the best way to go about it. Rather, you should be comparing it to other bootleg fighters such as the various Street Fighter games on the Nintendo Famicom, or even some of the Mega Drive bootlegs such as Top Fighter 2000. And in that regard, you've got a game that, with a little more polish, could have been something halfway decent at least. And I suppose if I were a Brazilian boy whose only games machine was a Master System, I guess I'd be happy to have a version of Street Fighter 2 to call my own. But since I'm not a Brazilian boy and I have many game machines within reach, this is a less than ideal version and more of an oddity for those who enjoy these sorts of oddities. In that regard, I found this game to be fascinating, but now that I've had my fill, I really don't need to touch this one anymore. All things considered, I think I'll stick with Kart Fighter from here on out.